Welcome to the debate. Today, we are turning our attention to a document that, well, it feels less like a standard political commentary and more like a verdict delivered by history itself. We are analyzing a profound, almost scorching essay titled A Soul's Clarion Call for the Pakistan Nation, written by Sami Ullah Malik. This is a text that completely bypasses the dry, technocratic language of economics and bureaucracy to perform a visceral, surgical examination of a nation's spirit.
It is certainly a piece of significant literary weight.
Quite. It is a piece of writing that demands we look beyond the symptoms of political decay and stare directly into the moral abyss that lies beneath. So, the core question we are framing today is this. Is the crisis facing the nation best understood as a failure of policy and economics, or, as Malik argues, a spiritual sickness requiring a complete revolt of conscience? I will be arguing that Malik's essay correctly identifies the collapse as deeply moral, not merely administrative. I support his assertion that silence is a confession of guilt and that a return to spiritual accountability is the only real surgery left.
Right. And I will take the slightly more skeptical view today. I absolutely appreciate the literary dignity of the piece, but I question whether framing a nation as a dying patient and invoking this sort of apocalyptic religious reckoning provides a practical roadmap. I mean, we have to ask if it risks deepening the very despair the author warns against.
Look, I think that distinction is exactly where the debate lies. But I would argue that Sami Ullah Malik's central thesis, and honestly the hill I'm willing to die on today, is that you simply cannot have one without the other. To answer your question directly, yes, the essay is correct. Malik opens with an image that sets the stage for everything else. He describes the nation as a gravely ailing patient that has dragged itself to the physician's door, its breath faltering, its pulse weakening.
It is a striking image, I grant you.
It is. But here is the critical insight. He says this condition is the harvest. It isn't a random misfortune or a stroke of bad luck. It is the harvest of misrule, injustice, fear, and silence. Because the root cause is deep-seated, he asserts that mere ointment will no longer suffice. We are past the point of painkillers. What is required now is surgery. He frames political power not as a prize to be won, but as a divine trust, an amana. He warns that when justice descends from the throne, states become living corpses. That is the core argument. If the moral core is rotten, the state is already dead, regardless of what the GDP growth figures might suggest in a quarterly report.
I see the power in that, I really do. It evokes the philosophy of Edmund Burke, the idea that the state is a moral partnership between the living, the dead, and those yet to be born. It is not just a utility company that provides electricity and security. But I must play the cynic here. Framing a modern nation of 240 million complex, diverse people as a single weeping patient, is that actually helpful? My concern is that by anthropomorphizing the system so dramatically, we make the problem too emotional. High drama stirs the blood, sure, but does it fix the electrical grid? Does it balance the national budget?
But isn't that the exact cynicism Sami Ullah Malik is attacking? He argues we have tried the ointment, we have tried the loans, the bureaucratic reshuffles, the transient politics of coalition building, and they have failed. Why? Because the physician, meaning the leadership, is treating the symptoms, not the disease. The disease is the betrayal of that trust. If the surgeon is corrupt, or if the surgeon fundamentally does not care if the patient lives or dies, the surgery will never happen. Malik is saying that technical competence without moral grounding is just a more efficient way to plunder the state.
Fair enough. That is a strong point, and I agree that competence without morality is deeply dangerous. But let's look at how he implicates the common man in this disease. This brings us to the argument regarding silence, which I actually found to be the most provocative part of the text.
Yes, this is where the text becomes uncomfortable for the reader, and intentionally so. Malik writes that the patient cannot speak, yet its wounds cry out. He vividly describes the wounds: deserted classrooms, ruined schools, the laborer's empty pocket. But then he pivots. He says history records silence not as neutrality, but as a confession of guilt.
It's a piercing line. It strips away the safety of being a bystander. It suggests that there is no audience in this theater. Everyone is on stage.
Exactly. He is arguing that in a collective society, there is no such thing as an innocent spectator when the state is collapsing. If the patient is the collective entity, the wounds are an indictment of the entire system. He forces the listener to acknowledge that the system persists because of collective silence. Silent spectators are partners in the crime. It is a move that reminds me of Hannah Arendt's analysis of the banality of evil. Evil thrives not just on the wickedness of the few, but on the passive acceptance of the many.
Morally, I understand the logic. It's the standard of silence is complicity. But practically, let's look at the reality Sami Ullah Malik himself describes. He mentions people facing crushing electricity and gas bills, homes that echo with the silence of hunger. Is it reasonable? Is it fair to demand that a man who cannot feed his children must also shoulder the guilt of the nation's collapse? There is a real risk here of victim blaming. The patient is dying because the doctor is incompetent, not because the patient's family is quiet. They are quiet because they are exhausted. They are just trying to survive.
I think you were missing the nuance there, though I do accept the heavy weight of that reality. Malik isn't blaming them for the hunger. He is blaming them for accepting it as fate. His point is that the leadership, the doctor, emerges from the society. You cannot separate the two. He addresses the custodians of power directly, yes, warning them that power is not a crown, but he's trying to shock the patient back into consciousness. He writes, as long as pain is felt, a nation remains alive.
That is an interesting reframe. Pain, not as suffering, but as a vital sign.
Precisely. If you are hurting, you are alive. A corpse feels no pain. The silence is the real death. The pain is the signal that surgery is still possible. If you view yourself only as a victim, you remain a victim. Sami Ullah Malik is calling for agency. He is telling the common man that his silence is the very permission slip the elite use to continue the plunder.
That bridge between pain and agency leads us directly to the specific tools Malik uses to motivate that agency. And this is where the essay takes a sharp turn into the theological. This is our next major point of contention, the use of divine accountability. Sami Ullah Malik does not shy away from religious language at all. He quotes Surah Ibrahim, Surah Al-Nahl. He explicitly frames political grievances as a prelude to the Day of Judgment.
And I would argue that this provides the text with its unique political gravitas and cultural resonance. In a secular Western context, we might cite the Constitution or the Bill of Rights or the concept of universal human rights as the ultimate arbiter. But Malik knows his audience, and he knows the history of the region. When the Constitution is ignored, when the courts are compromised and the law becomes fluid, what is the check on power? What stops a tyrant?
You are saying it has to be something higher.
It has to be. He cites the verse, "Do not think that a law is unaware of what the wrongdoers do." This isn't just religious instruction. It is a profound political warning to the elite that their immunity is temporary. It's a challenge to the pharaohs of today, as he calls them. He is reminding them that there is a court they cannot bribe and a judge they cannot intimidate.
It is undeniably effective rhetoric. He asks a terrifying question. He says, the martyrs will ask, "We gave our lives. What did you give?" It is designed to shame the leadership by invoking the sacred sacrifice of the past. But my hesitation remains. If we frame political failure as a sin against God, do we shut down the necessary pragmatic debate? If inflation is framed as a punishment for injustice, do we solve it with prayer or with monetary policy? My worry is that by spiritualizing the crisis, we absolve ourselves of the intellectual work required to actually fix the machinery of the state.
But Malik actually anticipates this critique, and I think he handles it brilliantly. He writes, prayer must walk hand in hand with surgery. He is not advocating for passive spirituality or fatalism. He is arguing that without the moral imperative, without the fear of that ultimate accountability, the surgery will never be performed because the surgeon is corrupt. He posits that power has become plunder rather than trust. You cannot fix plunder with a policy paper. You fix it by reestablishing the sacred nature of the trust. He is saying that we need the moral will to apply the intellectual solution. Power is not a crown, it is a trust. It echoes the classical Islamic concept of amana perfectly. It's a beautiful sentiment, and I admit, in a landscape devoid of ethical leadership, it rings like a bell in the night. But let us look at the emotional toll of this text. This brings us to the paradox of despair versus hope. This is, to me, the most philosophical section of Sami Ullah Malik's essay. He defines despair, the concept of yas, not just as an emotion, but as a satanic weapon.
Yes, he links it to Iblis, noting the linguistic root implies hopelessness. But here's the contradiction I simply cannot reconcile. The text spends pages detailing a nightmare scenario. Every meeting a rehearsal for a funeral. Homes echoing with the silence of hunger. He drags the reader through the absolute depths of misery, painting a picture of total systemic failure, and then he demands they not feel despair. Is he not demanding a psychological impossibility? How can one look at the ruin he describes and feel anything but despair?
I do not think it is a contradiction. I think it is the diagnosis. He is distinguishing between suffering and despair. Suffering is the condition. Despair is the surrender to that condition. Malik argues that the nation is being deliberately driven to despair.
Deliberately by whom?
By the status quo. By the beneficiaries of the current system. Because a despairing man does not fight. A despairing man accepts his fate. He writes, despair is more lethal than nuclear fallout. That is a profound insight. If the people believe the patient is already dead, they stop trying to save him. The nightmare scenario you mention is the reality. The despair is the weapon used to keep people trapped in that reality. He wants them to see the horror, yes, but to react to it with fury and resolve, not resignation.
So the detailed description of the horror is meant to validate the people's pain so they feel seen, but the warning against despair is the inoculation.
Exactly. He validates the sighs that escape before a word is spoken. He acknowledges the trauma. But then he pivots to resistance. He says, darkness does not fear a single lamp. It flees from a caravan of lamps.
I must admit, that line is brilliant. Darkness does not fear a single lamp. It acknowledges the futility of individual action, which is what causes the despair, while championing the power of collective action. It is poetic, but it is also politically astute. One lamp is a target. 1,000 lamps are a revolution.
Precisely. He quotes the tradition that the strong believer is better than the weak believer. He is defining strength not as physical might or wealth, but as the refusal to give up hope in the face of overwhelming evidence. He is trying to convert passive misery into active resistance. Sami Ullah Malik is effectively saying, your despair is their victory. Do not give it to them.
Let us drill down into that active resistance then. The solution. The text calls for surgery versus ointment. We have touched on this, but I want to look closer.
The distinction is vital. Ointment represents the superficial fixes, the loans that pay off interest on previous loans, the reshuffling of the same deck of political cards.
But what is the surgery? I read the text closely. Malik calls for uncompromising accountability and courageous decisions, but in the realm of political science, these are vague terms. A surgeon knows exactly where to cut, which artery to clamp, which tumor to excise. Does this text tell us where to cut, or is it simply screaming that a cut must be made?
I think you are looking for a policy white paper and a manifesto of the soul. You want a tax plan. Malik is offering a resurrection. The surgery he describes is a fundamental rejection of the status quo. When he says, return what belongs to its rightful owners, he is speaking of rights, dignity, and the sovereignty of the people. He is talking about the restoration of the social contract.
So the surgery is the removal of fear?
Yes. He writes, when conscience awakens, chains begin to fall of their own accord. The surgery is the removal of the mental shackles that have convinced the nation it is helpless. It is psychological and spiritual before it is institutional. If you change the laws but you do not change the spirit of the people, the new laws will be corrupted just like the old ones.
That is a fair interpretation. If the institutions are manned by people who are spiritually dead, the institutions will remain living corpses. It reminds me of the ancient Greek idea that the city is the people, not the walls.
And he argues that we have reached a point where delay is fatal. The operation must happen now. This leads to the ultimate ultimatum the essay presents. Either we respond to this call, or history will break the door down.
It is a haunting image, the idea that history is a force that cannot be barred. If you don't open the door to reform voluntarily, history kicks it in with revolution or ruin. It suggests that change is inevitable. The only choice we have is the nature of that change.
Will it be a controlled surgery or a violent amputation?
It reminds us that status quos are not eternal. They break. The only question is how they break. By our hands, through wisdom and foresight, or by the weight of their own corruption collapsing upon us.
As we conclude our discussion today, I must reflect on the totality of Samiullah Malik's work here. Despite my initial skepticism regarding the practical application, and I do still maintain that we need a roadmap alongside the manifesto, I cannot deny the power of the diagnosis. He has correctly identified that the malaise is not just in the wallet, but in the spirit. There is a dignity to his writing that elevates the political squalor into a Shakespearean tragedy. It demands that the reader take themselves seriously as an actor in history.
I agree entirely. Samiullah Malik has elevated the conversation. He has reminded us that nations do not die from poverty, they die from a poverty of spirit. When he writes that power is a trust and that tears are not marginal notes on bureaucratic files, he is restoring the humanity to a dehumanized system. This essay is indeed a clarion call. It asserts that the fear of the hereafter and the recognition of earthly power as a temporary test are the only things strong enough to break the cycle of plunder.
It leaves the listener with a heavy burden, but also a sliver of agency. The caravan of lamps is a possibility, provided one has the courage to light the first match. It suggests that the antidote to the darkness is not waiting for the dawn, but striking a light.
And that is exactly where Samiullah Malik leaves us, not with a conclusion, but with a choice. As he writes, this is not the conclusion of a tale. It is the knock of a beginning.
Indeed. The choice is now in our hands.
We thank you for listening to The Debate. This was a difficult text, a challenging text, but an absolutely necessary one. There's certainly much more to explore in this material.
Until next time.
Goodbye.